watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 44 of the podcast, getting deeper and deeper into the caverns of our early Spielberg series, and hopefully there's no booby traps along the way as we go through this episode, which is Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I have some special guests with me today. Chasah and Charliese West are joining us, the West sisters, as it says in the little corner of our Riverside recording studio for them. But yeah, Chasah and Charliese, it's great to have y'all on. Why don't y'all tell a little bit about yourselves, and I might ask some follow-up questions that the listeners might like to know. But yeah, just share a little bit about who you are, what you do, that sort of thing.
Well, I'm Chasah. I'm the slightly older sister.
I'm Charliese, the younger sister.
And we are directors, screenwriters, and directors of a few short films. We write films that are both of shorts and feature length, essentially as a creative enterprise. Let's say that. Anything you want to add?
And we dabble in doing a few things outside of film as well, but screenwriting has definitely been our bread and butter.
Yeah, y'all have I guess day jobs, as you would say, but your passion, I guess, is, from what I gather, at least from our discussions we've had, is doing your screenwriting and directing and that sort of thing. Am I right
Yes.
there?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was excited to have Chasah and Charliese on, just bringing kind of a different perspective than we've had. I don't think I've had anyone on that's done any screenwriting or directing before, at least not that they've told me. So
Well, we're excited.
yeah, but what I guess do y'all want to share maybe about some projects that y'all have worked on? I know y'all have had some recent stuff that's been premiering. If y'all want to talk about that, or maybe even kind of share where people can check out stuff that y'all have worked on, or at least follow you to find out where they can see it in the future.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So our first short film we co-directed. It's called Heritage, or Héritage in French, because it kind of specifically deals with the Creole language here in Louisiana, and a young girl who reconnects or connects for the first time with that Creole language heritage. And the second project that we completed was a solo directing project by me called Never Even, and Charliese was the producer that I hired to get that short film done. And she did an amazing job helping to bring together the actors, the behind the scenes crew. And currently, both of those films, you want to talk about the process we're in for both of those?
Yes, so for both of those, they are complete. We finished post-production on both of them basically neck and neck, even though they were filmed at separate times. But we are in the process of submitting these short films to film festivals.
Awesome. Yeah. I was actually able to check out Heritage. It was at the, correct me if I get the name of the festival wrong. I think it's just like the French Film Festival
Yes,
out of New Orleans.
The New Orleans French
Um,
Film Festival.
yeah, I
Correct.
wasn't able to attend, but there was an online package that you could get to be able to watch it, and so yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was like a very sweet, fun little short film.
Yeah.
Um,
It's kind of like
yeah,
a coming of age story,
y-
essentially, that
yeah,
also blends with language in a fun
yes,
way. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, and where can people kind of follow y'all so they can see where they might be able to watch those in the future?
Well, I believe the best way would be through Instagram. Our
Hmm.
Instagram handle is at set.west, set as in SET dot west, our last name.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to link that in the episode description as
Okay.
well, so that people can just go click on it. Um,
Awesome.
I
Perfect.
always appreciate when podcasts do that, so I always try to make sure I do that for mine. But yeah, it's really cool to have you guys on, bringing a little bit of different perspective. But like to, I guess, to transition into Spielberg talk. What was y'all's first introduction that you remember, at least, to Spielberg? My memory personally is like very blurry on that. I have
Mm,
like I have like a few that I'm like, I know I watched this as a kid, but I'm not sure what I watched first.
yeah.
Um, but I don't
Same.
know if y'all have a similar kind of
Honestly,
thing
yeah,
or
I
what.
think because his films were just on TV constantly and
Yeah.
talked about a lot. I remember knowing of Indiana Jones and probably also saw parodies of Indiana Jones before I really knew that that was the movie it came from. We
Oh yeah.
were really enamored with the young baby Drew Barrymore in E.T. when we were young, but honestly, I think once we got into writing and directing, which was like much later, um, it became much clearer to us that there were directors behind the movies that we were
Mhm.
watching. And so then became a lot more aware of him, and especially through people's conversation about just his directing techniques and just his amazing ability to do a couple things. Jurassic Park became a movie that we watched, and I remember loving the way that he handled tension and suspense and
Oh
things
yeah.
like that in Jurassic Park mostly.
And then for me, Chasah doesn't seem to remember this as much, but for me, I remember watching The Terminal, probably not when it first came out, but it was probably a few years after that. And since we grew up traveling a lot, our parents were missionaries. We were always in and out of airports. And
Mhm.
so as kids, we actually did do a lot of the cart returns so that we could get a quarter or sometimes whatever currency of the airport we might have been in. And tried to actually make some, some change so that we could go to the vending machine and get a snack. It was so fun. I remember running around the airport, grabbing those carts, and sometimes my mom would say, "Okay, it's time to go. Like we got to get to our gate. We got to catch our flight. Let's go."
Yeah, that's fun. I actually haven't seen Terminal.
Oh.
So hopefully whenever I do further Spielberg series, because for this one, I'm just covering 70s and 80s, and
Mhm.
I'll kind of decide if I want to keep going or maybe do something else. But I will definitely eventually make it through all of
Yeah.
Spielberg stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll catch up before that I do the series, or maybe I'll wait till the series. But yeah, I haven't seen The Terminal, so that's definitely one. But Jurassic Park was one of my early ones for sure, and
Yeah.
E.T. Um, so we're similar age, so we probably like are that. I mean, E.T. was early '80s, but Jurassic
Hmm.
Park is like the '90s kids. You know, like
Nightmare.
Spielberg movie, like the Spielberg movie for the '90s kids, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
A little
but
bit
yeah,
nightmare fuel, a little bit awe
Yeah.
mixed
yes, for
together.
sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I always, whenever I think of Spielberg, uh, well, as far as Jurassic Park goes, I think of obviously the T-Rex, which is the fear, but also like the first time they see the dinosaurs, like that is like an image that I
Yeah.
can picture in my mind. which is the wonder, which is kind of like something Spielberg just does. He does fear and wonder like all throughout his filmography. But yeah, let's jump into the Raiders content. What do y'all remember the first time you saw Raiders, or is it just kind of well, you kind of mentioned it's kind of like you knew about it.
Yeah, I think there were probably cartoon shows we were watching that were using the theme song and had the hat thing going on and the whip,
Oh yeah.
and then we finally maybe later saw it and made the connection. So I honestly don't remember the first time I saw it all the way through.
Hmm.
I just know
Yeah, I
Indiana
don't
Jones
either.
was always a thing, you know?
Right. Yeah, he's kind of like the character is just kind of like an iconic part of culture.
Yeah.
The character and the like march thing, the Indiana Jones march kind of John Williams score.
In fact, I think it's a Rugrats episode
Oh
where
yes,
little
they're
Tommy
parodying.
Pickles is pretending to be an explorer and doing the
I
whole
do
thing.
remember that
Yeah.
actually. Now that you say that, he even has
So
like a
I'm gonna
whip
say
of
that's
sorts, doesn't he?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the
Yeah.
camera angles, and they're looking at him as the heroic leader. And I'm gonna say that's officially the first time we encountered some semblance of Indiana Jones was an episode of Rugrats.
You know, that now that you're saying that, you're bringing back memories of being a kid watching Rugrats. So I might have a similar introduction to Indiana Jones, to be honest. Um, it's fun. It's fun too to go for like when you're thinking about like references in pop culture. The first thing that one of the things that I did for this, or I did it for something. It might have been looking at like Jaws or something like that. I was wondering how many references in The Simpsons there were, um, because The Simpsons just like reference movies like endlessly. Um, and I've never been like a big Simpsons watcher. I've maybe
Same.
seen a couple episodes, but I was just curious, like how many Spielberg references are in Simpsons.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's jump into talking through Raiders. It's a really interesting story. Yeah, George Lucas is kind of the, I guess, mastermind behind Indiana Jones. It's, I guess now it kind of has Spielberg stamped on it. But George Lucas was a huge part of making this movie happen. And it's interesting. George Lucas, I feel like when you kind of look at stuff that was like his idea versus stuff he directed himself, it's kind of like, okay, he's the idea man. Like he has great ideas. Maybe he doesn't always need to be the one behind the camera. And that's why producer is a job, because producers and story makers like make good stories, but maybe they don't do as good of work behind the camera as someone like Spielberg.
Mm.
But yeah, Lucas, the inception of this started way back in 73. He started kind of playing around with the idea. He ended up sharing it with Spielberg actually after Star Wars in 77. They were both in Hawaii. He kind of shared the idea with him. And yeah, he worked with Philip Kaufman on the script in 75 is when they kind of sat down to really dig into the script. And yeah, they had at that point it was still Indiana Smith, The Adventures of Indiana Smith, and so that would have been very. It sounds strange. Maybe it would have been normal if it
Yeah. Yeah.
if it would have been called that from the beginning. But yeah, that actually a fun fact: the name Indiana came from Lucas's wife's dog. They had an Alaskan Malamute dog named Indiana, and so that was where the name came from.
It's so unique.
Yeah, and I think too, I looked up at Alaskan Malamute, so I know what it looks like in my head, and it doesn't look like Chewbacca, but apparently that dog also inspired the character of Chewbacca. I guess maybe like the companionship
Mm-hmm.
aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so anyways, he worked with Philip Kaufman on the script. Kaufman had some of the really good ideas too. He kind of came up with the MacGuffin of the Ark of the Covenant. Um, he was the one that kind of started the idea of having Nazi villains, because the Nazis, some of the Nazi leaders apparently were like in real life really like attracted to occult kind of stuff.
Mm.
And so yeah, him and Kaufman worked on it a lot. And eventually it got to a point where they wanted Kaufman couldn't really do it. He had another movie going on, so he couldn't direct it. And they eventually, Lucas decides, okay, Kaufman can't do it. I'll bring on Spielberg. And Spielberg kind of like pretty, at this point, is pretty aware that he's not the best writer. And so he's kind of like, okay, we got to bring a writer on. And so they had liked the script that was going around by Lawrence Kasdan, who had written Empire Strikes Back for Lucas, so he was familiar with
Yeah.
him. And so they brought him on to do the script. And in 78, they started kind of brainstorming, the three of them, Lucas, Spielberg, and Kasdan. And yeah, they took, yeah, I always like to see what inspirations there are, but they were looking at like Michael Curtiz movies, John Huston, Howard Hawks. So all these kind of, these kind of directors that do these like very like kind of epic American movies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then also they're just like looking at all these different genres, thrillers and westerns and spy films and samurai films, and just kind of pulling elements from all of these. But the idea really started with kind of wanting to call back to the kind of serials that would show at the theater in the 40s and 50s, or really 30s and 40s, I guess. So obviously at that point, people didn't have TVs in their homes, but there was still kind of what we would think of as TV shows just at the theater.
Yeah.
So, they would go to the theater and you would see like a feature film, but then they would show these serials too. And they called them either serials or cliffhangers, because they would always end with a cliffhanger that you had to come back the next Saturday to see what happened next. So that was kind of a big inspiration for Lucas. And then, when he brought on Spielberg was like all in on that idea too. And they kind of had the idea to just like put one cliffhanger right after the next until it was a feature length film. And
You can
so,
definitely see those influences
oh
shining
yeah,
through.
yeah. And Spielberg, I actually have a quote. He said, "Each cliffhanger is better than the one before." That's kind of,
You could see
he
it.
wanted to just build and build and build. And yeah, I mean, you really do see that in the movie, because every like 10 to 15 minutes, like something is happening. There's some like maybe exposition here, maybe some like drama here, but then like when that 10-minute mark hits, or 10 to 15-minute mark hits, like there's more like
Yeah.
action.
Indiana's either hanging off of the bottom of a car or climbing onto a submarine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Running away from a giant rock.
Yeah.
But yeah, Indiana Jones, the character, had a lot of kind of development. They obviously like pretty vital to have a character like this to really like hone in on who he's going to be when the movie really like kind of rides on the success of this particular character.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Spielberg was wanting kind of like a Humphrey Bogart or Clark Gable type gruff kind of character. And then Lucas, I think it's interesting because I think what we get with Indiana Jones is the result of collaboration, because they had different ideas about who they wanted this character to be, and they each kind of had to compromise, and they met in the middle. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the result that we end up with is probably better for that. Um, and I don't know. I would assume y'all doing some writing together probably have some similar experiences where you have different ideas of what you want to do and have to kind of like compromise a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say it's happened in the past with characters that we've come up with where if it seems like we're seeing the character too differently, like in a strong way, they'll usually divide and then it becomes two characters, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I could see that for sure. But that, yeah, I guess they couldn't really split Indiana Jones. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess kind of they did. Lucas really wanted him to have like a university man kind of contrast for, I guess, like, I think like a little bit of like comedic effect. Um,
I know,
but
right? A professor going on all of these adventures. That is quite,
right,
it's a dichotomy for sure.
yeah. And I'm not, it seemed like Spielberg was kind of like indifferent about that idea, but I guess kind of just gave in because this is Lucas's story, his idea. So, but yeah, early on, even they kind of envisioned the transition from opening in the jungle and then going straight into a scene like at a museum, or it ends up being, at the university. But so early on, they had kind of envisioned that contrast right from the
Mm-hmm.
get go and
Mm-hmm.
ended up doing it.
I think it allows it to feel more like a complex character, which then
Mm,
makes him feel more real instead of one dimensional. So
sure.
I think
Mhm.
it all came out for the better in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I think, I definitely think their compromises work. Um, because, well, another thing is Lucas really wanted him to be kind of like he described it as like a grave robber for hire, or an outlaw archaeologist. And there's definitely hints of that, but Spielberg like waters it down a lot. Because he probably would have been less likable if you leaned too much into that kind
Yeah.
of character, I guess.
Especially back
Um,
then.
oh yeah. And then there's real archaeologists that went on adventures. Like I haven't seen the movie The Lost City of Z, but there is that archaeologist that it's based off of. I think his name is Percy Fawcett, um, and others that kind of influence it. Um, and yeah, Indiana Smith turned into, of course, Indiana Jones because Spielberg hated Indiana Smith. I think there was another like a Western that had come out at that time that was something Smith, and Spielberg was like, "Oh, I don't want it to be like that. Let's change it."
Mm-hmm.
And
That
so
makes
they
sense.
went with the first, like most had surname, I guess, to I guess the second.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how they decided, but I'm pretty sure Smith is like the highest
Very
surname in
common. Yeah.
America, and I
Yeah.
think Jones is the second. So, um, yeah, I just think that's funny. Um, he also had influence. There was a Charlton Heston character named Harry Steele in a movie called Secret of the Incas, who also had like a worn leather jacket and a fedora and a whip. And so definitely some influence there too. Um, but yeah, they do that brainstorming session, and then of course Lucas goes on to direct Empire. Spielberg starts working on the movie 1941, which comes out in between Close Encounters and this movie that we're discussing, which I still haven't seen because I'm recording these a little
Me
out of
neither.
order. So I'll be watching that probably maybe this weekend or very soon. But um, 1941 was kind of a big flop, both critically and commercially. Like it just didn't do well. The critics didn't like it. the audiences didn't go for it. And so this really like Raiders ends up being a big pick me up for Spielberg after that. But yeah, one of the really interesting things that this movie, I guess, kind of like more studio, the inner workings of Hollywood kind of thing, is Lucas I guess, coming off of Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, really started having some kind of power, I guess, in the studio system. And this is kind of around the time when there was like this starting to be this big switch from, the studios and the head honchos of the studios having all the power to guys like directors and the actual filmmakers having more power, because their names started being the main thing. It stopped being like, this is a Paramount picture, this is a MGM picture, and started being, this is a Spielberg picture.
Oh yeah.
This is a, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so Lucas has a lot more power. So he sits down with studios. It ends up being with making it with Paramount, but he bypasses using an agent and asked for a $20 million budget up front. He wanted like a 5-film commitment. He wanted 80% of the profits before the studio recouped anything.
Sounds like a sweet deal.
Yeah, he wanted rights to spin-offs and sequels and the ability to keep artistic control. And yeah, he really just like went for it. And he might have got most of that if it weren't for the fact that he was nailed into having Spielberg as the director. Because at this point, Spielberg was, that's the director that goes over budget and over schedule. And so the studio did kind of give him most of what he asked for, I think. And I think there was a kind of, I think it was slightly lowered because he wouldn't, he was like committed to Spielberg, and that makes the studio nervous. So he had to give in a little bit, but yeah, he gets most of what we wanted. There was a clause, I think, about going over budget, like they would have to pay penalties if they went over budget.
Ooh.
And so, but yeah, Spielberg kind of, I think Spielberg was obviously in on some of those talks, and he kind of ends up kind of rolling with that in the future. Like that becomes his MO, is upfront budgets, because that wasn't typically how things were done. You don't get everything up front. But I guess when you're Steven Spielberg and you're able to put out Jaws and then Close Encounters and have one bad movie, but then put out Raiders, it's kind of like you start to,
you deserve a little trust after all of that.
Oh yeah. And it also helped that Spielberg started his own production company that same year. So he had actually requested for producer Frank Marshall to come on to produce. He had just seen some of his work and respected him and really wanted him to produce. They struck a relationship along with Kathleen Kennedy, who also produced on Raiders. And yeah, those three, Spielberg, Marshall, and Kennedy, ended up starting Amblin Production Studios in 1981. So I'm guessing it was probably after this movie released, or maybe before. I don't really know. It was after they made the movie, but obviously it released in 81, but it was shot and produced in 1980. But yeah, and I didn't see Kennedy. I saw somewhere Kennedy was really good at keeping track of Spielberg's ideas and compiling them, because Spielberg is just like, he's just throwing out all these ideas.
Yeah, it takes all kinds. You need both skills.
Yeah. And I think Frank Marshall was kind of the guy that's like, protecting him from the studio and kind of doing that role of being like the guy that he kind of like the ambassador on both ends. Like he's going to Spielberg with the studio stuff and being like, hey, this is, what, let's work on this, but also like going to the studio and being like, no, Spielberg's not doing that, kind of being the middleman there.
Yeah.
So you really do need like all of that.
All positions on the team. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always interesting. Sometimes director producer relationships are like really like not great, but it's always fun to see like when they work well together. Like in this case, obviously they did, or they wouldn't have started their own production company together. But
right.
Hi. Quick reminder that you, yes, you can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show. Let's talk about the cast. Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, but it almost wasn't Harrison Ford. At one point, they wanted Jeff Bridges, I think.
That would have been interesting. I could see the gruffer thing that you were talking about.
Yeah, he would have. Maybe gruffer. Jeff Bridges was. He had some strange roles. I don't know. I guess today maybe people don't think of him as like a strange actor, but like he was doing movies like, have y'all ever seen Starman?
I've heard about it. I haven't
It's
seen
a weird
it, but
movie.
yeah,
It's
he's
a
like
weird
an
movie,
alien.
and
I'll have to add to the list.
And he plays a weird role. Like I don't think it's a bad movie. It's just weird. And but yeah, so I don't really know what he would have been like as Indiana Jones. But that really didn't have much traction. I do know that Lucas did not want Harrison Ford. He like had this weird thing where he was like, I don't want to be tied to an actor. I think it was kind of like, I don't want to be like Scorsese and De Niro, where you like get kind of tied to an actor.
Yeah.
Which I guess I can see, but also like, if they're right for the role, they're right for the role.
It worked out anyway.
Yeah. But they actually had they had cast Tom Selleck for the role of Indiana Jones. Wow. He had a really good audition. Actually heard a clip on something I was listening to of his audition. I didn't see it, but I heard the clip from it. But yeah, he was basically like, yeah, it's going to be Tom Selleck. But Tom Selleck had just shot the pilot for Magnum PI, and when he had done that, he had signed an exclusive contract with that studio. And Lucas and Spielberg and their team were just like begging the studio, please, let us have Tom for this movie, and they wouldn't budge on that contract. And so Tom Selleck falls through, and at the last minute they kind of call in Harrison Ford. Lucas is like, I guess we got to use old Harry.
This guy.
Gotcha. Lucky Harrison.
Yeah.
And one of the things I liked in one of the making of doc things I was watching, Ford was sitting there and he was like, yeah, ordinary things make me nervous, but movies, they don't make me nervous anymore. It's kind of like and you can kind of see like when you watch him on set and stuff, he's just kind of like in his
Relax.
element, you know.
Yeah.
And really similar with Spielberg. It's like he's just in his element when he's on set directing. But yeah, other cast members, Karen Allen plays Marion Ravenwood, which I always forget her last name is Ravenwood, which is a really cool last name.
Yeah, it is. It's very epic.
Yeah. And she, I want to say she had some like stage acting background, and which I think really came in handy because there was one of the quotes I had put down from her was she said that she had never done this kind of stylized acting on film, which is true. You know, in stage acting, you have to be way more expressive and big, and you don't always, that doesn't always translate to film. But for a film like this, it's like perfect. She has to be very expressive and big,
Yeah.
especially because she's like acting against Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. And then, you know, also being attacked by corpse skeletons. So, but yeah, I thought that was interesting, you know, where normally that wouldn't translate well, but for this movie, it's like perfect.
I feel like she fits right in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Other casting things, Paul Freeman, who plays Belloc, which Paul Freeman is an English actor, which is, I don't know, there just seems like there's for a long time this thing where anytime you have someone, a foreign character, it's just like, oh, we'll just cast an English actor to play whatever foreign character.
Any nationality.
Yeah.
From Europe.
From anywhere.
From
like,
anywhere.
I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, they did have a French actor, Jacques Dutronc. I'm probably butchering saying that French last name, but I don't know what happened with him, but he couldn't do it. So they bring in Paul Freeman, who I think is really good as Belloc. You know, he's smart and menacing enough. He's not like evil, scary kind of thing, but like you can tell he's a bad player.
Yeah.
Has a bit of light side, dark side talk, even with Indiana Jones when they meet up in Cairo. So, but yeah, you also have John Rhys Davies as Salah, again, an English actor for. I guess he's supposed to be
Middle Eastern,
Egyptian,
Middle Eastern from Cairo or something like that. But the funny casting what if for this one is that they originally had Danny DeVito as their first choice, and I just can't see it.
Yeah,
I can't.
I'm sorry, Danny DeVito, but I just can't see it.
Was he not? Was he in the Romancing the Stone?
I believe he was.
Yeah.
DeVito?
Yeah.
That sounds right. That might have been what did that come out in 81 also?
That I'd have to look up, but I know he's done an adventure movie, so maybe he was really, open to doing either that beforehand or afterwards.
Yeah.
But he kept his accent for sure in Romancing the Stone.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't see him playing Salah at all. He had like a scheduling conflict, so he couldn't do it. And I think that's for the best. Let's be honest. But yeah, there's a lot of other guys that pop up. Of course, you have Ronald Lacey is the guy that plays Tot, the kind of main evil Nazi guy, who I didn't really like. I should have looked at his filmography to see if I knew him from anything else. But he doesn't like look super familiar from anything else. But he does have like, I feel like the perfect face for that role. Just kind of like, I don't even know how to describe his face. It's kind of like, I don't know. His face almost looks childlike, in a way, which
Mhm.
makes him even creepier because I don't know. But yeah, you have a lot of others. Marcus Brody, played by Denholm Elliott. You have you have Alfred Molina making a young
Yes.
appearance as one of the. He's the is he the guy that like leaves Indy behind in the cave? Is that
Yes,
that
Very
character?
early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he
Almost unrecognizable.
right. He does
He's
not
so
last
young.
the whole movie, of course, as we know.
No.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler. Um, yeah. The other, you have Pat Roach, the big guy. He's actually in two roles. I think he's in the tavern kind of gunfight sequence. He's a big guy there and dies, of course. And then he's the big mechanic that Indy fights next to the plane. But he was like a pro wrestler, I think.
Oh yeah.
Which makes
He's
sense.
very, very big. Yeah.
Yes. So I thought that was good casting too. And then another kind of fun fact, they were kind of short on extras when they were shooting that sequence at the plane. And so Spielberg asked Frank Marshall, the producer, to step in and be the pilot. So that the pilot that's like in the plane and trying to like shoot
Right
at
before
Indy.
she takes him out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Before Marion takes him out.
That's the producer, Frank Marshall. So that's a fun fact.
Wearing those double hats. It happens.
Yep. Always fun. Yeah. And then real quick, we can run through some of the crew. Some interesting. You of course we've talked about Lucas and Kaufman and Kasdan, all entwined in the story and screenplay. The DP or cinematographer was Douglas Slocum, who I didn't recognize that name, but he did shoot all three of the first Indy movies. And the only other like big movie that I noticed was the original Italian Job movie. He shot that.
Nice.
So that was really the only one that like popped out to me. So, but yeah, it's interesting. You have this.
Makes sense why they all look so consistent as well.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but that is true. And then Michael Kahn, he kind of started on with Spielberg for Close Encounters, and I want to say, I think we talked about it in that episode, but he's edited every Spielberg film since Close Encounters except E.T. and The Fabelmans. So that is a very strong collaborator.
Yeah.
John Williams, of course.
When people find I was going to say, I love it when people find their collaborators and are able to get in a good rhythm and groove. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And, I think I want to say in that Close Encounters episode 2, either in that one or Jaws, I was like giving a shout out to editors because editing is like very hard. The more like I learn about filmmaking and everything, the more I'm like, editing is like, you really don't have a movie until it's edited. And like, I think people don't realize like how much storytelling goes into the editing too. It's not just like the screenplay that tells the story, but it's the way it's edited that tells the story too. And so for him to like find Khan and like basically like he's his editor for every film, like that's a huge deal to find a guy like that and to like have him stick with you for basically your whole career.
Yeah, right.
Makes things easier, I'm sure. Maybe not easier, but
we probably develop a shorthand and definitely got to be nice to that person.
Oh yeah, for sure. Did you have any editing insights, Charliese?
Basically, just know your technology, know your software programs, and YouTube.
And have patience. Because I think something that's found in the edit as well is sometimes the emotion. Like the actors portray something. And
Right.
honestly, the music plays a big role, but sometimes it's the cuts that actually give that fine-tuned action reaction, which you need to understand what's
Oh yeah.
going on screen on an emotional level.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And they actually were doing, film stock editing, not using. They didn't have
Yeah.
software. They were cutting the film and splicing it, and
Mhm.
Yes.
it's got to be real fun, huh? How do you feel about doing some of that editing, Charliese?
Oh my gosh. Well, so our mom used to work in news, and
Yeah,
before that at her school she did do a lot of actual, clipping and
yeah,
editing by hand, and she's told us about it, and to be honest, I just thought it was very tedious. I don't think I would have been a
yeah,
filmmaker if I was born in her time.
Yeah, because this was for her school, her like high school library, right? Yeah.
wow, yeah,
So,
that's really cool. I think it's a cool like skill to know. Not as useful these days unless you're Christopher Nolan, but yeah, I think it's still really cool. Um, I think, yeah, I don't know. I think Nolan is definitely the main guy that's still like shooting and editing on film and stuff like that. But you know, yeah, it's technology's good too though. It's good to have.
yeah, helps.
Yeah. It definitely helps me with this to be able to quickly edit out like when I'm coughing or something like that.
Movie
um,
magic.
um, the only other cast member or crew member, sorry, I wanted to shout out was Norman Reynolds, who was the production designer. Because just iconic production design.
Yes.
Just everything is just so good. So I definitely wanted to shout out him, good old Norman Reynolds. I should have looked up his filmography too. I wonder if he did all the indie movies, or I guess we'll find out on future episodes.
Yeah.
Tune back in for the Temple of Doom episode to see if Norman Reynolds stuck around as production designer. John Williams too, of course. And I think I
Iconic.
briefly mentioned another big collaborator. But yeah, let's talk about the production, because there's a lot of fun stuff in the production side of
Oh,
this. The film was organized rigorously from the start, which is because the exact reason we talked about earlier of Spielberg's reputation of being the over budget and over scheduled director. I know y'all have done a couple of movies. Do y'all have like people telling you, because I know y'all's are just mostly like more independent and stuff like that, but do y'all have like, hey, we funded you, we want it done by this? Have y'all had any of that sort of thing?
We have some deadlines that are within, let's say, a 12-year span, or let's say we have a
Gotcha.
9-month span to do something based on a grant we've received. But actually,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
ends up being more of a time constraint and kind of putting a parameter around what we have to do was the fact that when we shot both of our short films, we had day jobs, and we were
Yeah.
using actors and crew members who aren't necessarily doing that stuff full time. So they also had jobs to go back to. And so
Mhm.
for Heritage, we had a 3-day shoot. And for Never Even, we had a 1-day shoot. And the 3-day
Yeah.
shoot was like a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I want to say. We took off
Mhm.
the Monday. And then the shoot for Never Even was a Saturday shoot, I want to say. So
Yeah.
again, helps that they're short films. They're not super long, but
Yeah.
definitely had to get it done within a very short span of time.
Yeah. So how much like prep did y'all do before y'all got there to shoot? Was it like just a ton of?
Yes, so especially for Heritage was a labor of love that we had been working on probably for about a year and a half prior to shooting. For Never Even, it may have been a little shorter, but it was still closer to probably 8, 9 months before, gearing up to film it.
Yeah.
And part of it was as well for Heritage doing storyboards. So I drew a bunch of pictures beforehand
Mm.
and showed them to Charlize to kind of make sure we were both picturing the same thing as to like how we wanted to capture stuff. And then for Never Even, because it's a story told in reverse, we had to
Mm.
do what they call in like the big leagues pre-visualization. So we basically
Yeah. Hmm.
shot it
On our
all
phone.
on our phones with us playing the characters and then reversed the footage to make sure that it made sense, and then
Yeah.
we knew what we needed to capture on the day.
Yeah. Which kind of calling back to an episode I did for the Nolan series, that they did a ton of previs work for Tenet, obviously, to kind of see how it would play out forwards and backwards. So yeah, that was wild to watch some of the kind of computer generated things they were like using to previs for that movie. So I definitely can see how that's a lot
Yeah.
of like prep work to make sure that
Yeah.
that's going to play out right.
And I would say
Um,
previs is like the fancy way to say it. Really, what happened is we just shot it twice.
right. Yeah.
We don't have any
It,
fancy
you know,
CGI.
yeah, but it's still pre-visualization. It's
Yeah.
just without computer software.
Yes. Yeah.
um, but yeah, so Spielberg obviously does. He's kind of coming into this to kind of like prove himself. He's like, I don't want to be the over budget, over scheduled director anymore. Probably partly because he wanted to have a better relationship with the studios.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not like he had planned to go over budget and over schedule on his movies, but he just like, he was young, and I mean, he was making Jaws when he was like in his mid-20s. So I mean, he's just young. He doesn't completely know what he's getting into. He just has a dream and a vision and wants to capture it. But like Jaws went like 100 days over schedule. It was like a crazy nightmare of a production. And so he's just like, I'm starting a new leaf. We're getting this done in budget, under schedule. I think he had officially like 85 days for shooting, and he had like this kind of secret goal for himself of getting it done in 73 days. And some of the things he did, they did a lot of like not doing a bunch of takes. So Spielberg, I think even on one of the making of things, I saw him kind of like saying, we're not getting hair out of face. We're not like doing all this. Like if the hair's in the face, that's just part of the shot,
Art. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not shooting it again. That's just going to, I even heard at one point he was like walking away and he said, that's Hollywood, next shot. And then it like cut to a talking head of him saying something to the effect of, the more we lie to ourselves, the more money we save. Just meaning like lying to himself that was a good shot. Because I'm sure y'all can relate to having something envisioned in your mind and wanting to get it perfect, but also like having the constraint of, we need to move on, we've got more things to shoot.
Definitely.
And we don't want to like destroy the morale of our cast and crew. But yeah, he also for the first time took on a second unit director for this movie, which he had never done before. So it was a guy named Michael D. Moore. Probably the biggest work he did was with the car chase scene. He did like probably like 2 or 3 weeks worth of shooting before Spielberg and Harrison Ford even like got there to shoot that stuff. They were working on some other location and shots, and so they did a lot of the shooting for that car chase scene. Basically, like anything that Harrison Ford's face isn't in was shot before Spielberg even got on set. And it's just, he was like, I want to be under schedule. I don't want to go over schedule. And so yeah, the second unit director, it's a good choice
Nice.
when you want to stay
Yeah.
stay under schedule.
Yeah.
But I did also see, I read that despite all of this, it was most of the people involved like recalled a pretty like relaxed atmosphere, even despite like this, which I guess makes sense if he's like not being so like hard on like let's get this shot perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I could see how that could create like an atmosphere where you can be more relaxed because you're like not uptight and not trying to get everything exactly perfect. That's probably like that. That's how I probably would be if I was a director. All right, let's move on. We'll work with what we've got, sort of thing. But yeah, but yeah. So basically, Spielberg's like, we got to get this thing done. So they start off in June 1980 in La Rochelle, France. They use that location for the Cairo port kind of section of the movie. They rent an Egyptian steamer that was in Ireland for some reason, and they got that boat for that section. They rented a U-boat from another movie that was shooting in the same location at the same time. Das Boot, the German film, was shooting there too, and so they rented the U-boat. That's probably like the titular boat from that movie, from them, or maybe is, I don't know if it is the titular boat, but one of the boats in that movie rented it from them for the submarine portion. So yeah, they're there shortly, and then they move to Elstree Studios, which is outside of London. And so all of the interiors were shot at Elstree Studios. So, the map room, with the staff, you have the secret military base at the very end, the Peruvian cave full of traps, the where they find the set where they find the Ark, with the huge statues and the snakes. All of that is shot at Elstree Studios. It's kind of one of those things where Lucas had shot Star Wars there. So he had shot Star Wars at Elstree, and then also they did work in Tunisia. That's basically Tatooine is Tunisia in Star Wars, and so all the desert stuff in Raiders is in Tunisia. So it's just kind of like Lucas is like, I'm familiar with these. We can work well. We know what we're doing. So that's what they went with.
Yeah.
Which probably helps a ton, the familiarity, at least on Lucas's part. I don't know how many of the other people had spent time in Tunisia that were on the crew. But yeah, one of the things that happened at Elstree Studios that I thought was interesting was they were shooting The Shining in one of the studios there, and there was like a fire or something during that shooting, and so there was like a delay in getting started with the shooting for Raiders. But the benefit was they kind of expanded that studio because I guess like when they were fixing whatever happened with the fire. And so Spielberg was able to like fit those huge statues
Nice.
in the studio because they expanded it. So it's
lucky.
Thank you, Stanley Kubrick and Jack Nicholson, for expanding the studio for us.
We might have had really tiny statues otherwise.
Yeah. Or at least not as like giant and menacing as the ones you get there. But yeah, they do, I'm sure I don't have like exact time frames of how long they spent in each location, but I would imagine they probably spent a good amount of time there getting all those shots for those, those set pieces. And it's really cool too to see like all that stuff getting kind of put together. Like when you watch the making of stuff and just see them, I mean, there's like the site where they, recover the Ark that's a huge set. It's like ginormous. And you've got, those giant statues that Indiana rides into the wall.
Yeah.
It's just really good, like,
Adds
production
to the
there.
epicness. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but they move on from there. They go to a place called Kairouan, which I probably butchered that. It's in Tunisia. It's the little town that they use to kind of be a stand-in for the streets of Cairo. And I read that the production team even removed like hundreds of TV antennas because they were doing like a wide shot of this town. And at this point, these people have TV, so they've got antennas.
Yeah. Wow.
But they chose it because it still had a lot of the architecture had the feel of like this would have been like set in the 30s. So it had like a feel of like 30s Cairo in this little town.
Nice.
But 30s Cairo with TV antennas doesn't really look quite right. So
Little less
I thought that was like,
believable.
I thought that was a fun fact. But while they were there in Tunisia, they were obviously plagued by intense heat. I read that it was 130 degrees in the sun and like 120 degrees in the shade. So
that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in the making of they said something like 5,000 gallons of water used every day or something like that.
That's insane.
I guess between like getting water to all the cast and crew and, whatever else they're using water for cooking or, whatever, which is wild.
Yeah.
But they were also plagued by a stomach. I've read stomach bug in some places. I've also read dysentery, which I guess dysentery kind of is basically like a stomach bug of sorts.
And didn't Harrison Ford get it too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, like everyone got it except Spielberg because Spielberg was just like eating canned food. He had brought. I don't know if he got like a warning from Lucas, like, "Hey, when you go to Tunisia, you better bring some canned food." But I can just imagine like Spielberg just like nomming on SpaghettiOs and like being like,
feeling fine,
hey, you guys
wondering why everyone else is vomiting.
Yeah, you guys should have brought some canned food, everybody got it. Ford, Harrison Ford had it bad at one point, and but we got something great out of that because I think something we haven't mentioned. I did like a faith and film small group at our church, and Chasah and Charliese were really like pretty much the only people that were part of that. So it was like a 3-person discussion group. So we did talk about Raiders in that discussion group for 1 week, which was really fun. But I think we did talk about how that the swordsman. So there's the scene where Jones like shoots the swords. He just like pulls out the sword and he pulls out his gun and shoots them. Yeah. Like a great, like kind of, I guess, comedic action little thing. It kind of makes you like chuckle when it happens. But that wasn't in the script. They actually had like that swordsman had done like a few weeks of like training for a whole like fight sequence. And it got to that day and Harrison Ford was so sick. He like begged Spielberg like to not make him do that sequence.
Poor baby. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what they came up with. And it ends up being like, I don't know. It's hard to say if it's better, but it's definitely like something that a lot of people remember and think is funny,
Yeah. It's definitely memorable.
Oh yeah. And it's funny how like you have kind of happy accidents with stuff like that. And when you're like putting together something like this, where something you didn't plan for like ends up being actually like working out really well for you.
That's
Um,
true.
yeah. And yeah, really like the last week of filming they did in Hawaii was the last location they did. And they did a lot of like the opening scene there in Hawaii, which I would imagine that's like, I don't know if they did it on purpose for this reason necessarily, but I would imagine it's like, all right, everybody, we're wrapping things up. Let's all go to Hawaii. I bet it's like everybody's like, oh yeah, what a nice place to finish our production,
To
you
recover
know?
from all this
Yeah.
dysentery too.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
to
mind
recover from Tunisia in Hawaii. Probably a good idea. One of the fun facts that comes out of that was it was kind of like a last minute idea Spielberg had, which was to crossfade the Paramount logo with the first shot of the film. And
You
so
had
they
noticed
did
that,
like,
huh?
yeah, they did a bunch of scouting to find a mountain that looked real similar to the Paramount logo there in Hawaii, and and did that shot, and then it's cool too, because not only do you get the crossfade with the Paramount logo,
Yeah.
which is like, I guess maybe another way of Spielberg like being like, hey studio, look what I did, cool with your logo, you can
You
like
like?
me, give me more big budgets for movies. But he also like is, after a second of seeing that mountain, there, the first like next image you see is the silhouette of Indy, walking up with the fedora. And it's like, you've basically like introduced your character right off the bat.
Yeah.
And like, you don't even have to like know anything else about him. You just see kind of his figure and you're like, oh yeah, this is the guy. This is the adventurer.
Yes.
This is the guy I'm excited to watch, to follow through this movie, just from like seeing him step into frame, and seeing like kind of what the back of him looks like.
Right. Because I think it also does a great job of establishing setting, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
to just start off with something strong like that, and to understand a character's setting helps you to understand them too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of like all the locations they ended up in. um, we talked a little bit about Spielberg and his directing, but I really think, like, I watched the making of documentary like from back in 81. There's also like a 2012 kind of on the set thing that I didn't like watch and take notes. I kind of just had it on in the background while I was doing some other stuff. And one of the things that I really appreciated was Spielberg just looks like he's having so much fun filming
Mm-hmm.
making this movie.
Yeah.
And I always appreciate when I can like see a director just like really having a good time.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, he like for this one, I think he had started doing this. This one I think is like really where his storyboarding like became real strong. He like notoriously can't draw well. His storyboards are like stick figures, and so he has like, yeah, that would be me too. He has like artists come in and turn his stick figure storyboards into like nice looking storyboards. And but yeah, he like runs through you can see like footage of him running through those with the actors, which is fun. And there's one it was actually in both of those documentaries that I watched, the same little thing where he's like going through the the Ark site, like dropping into the Ark site with the actors and stuff, and flipping through the storyboard and talking through it with them. And like Harrison Ford's like eating a sandwich or something while he's like telling them. And at one point, Ford like goes like, "I'm gonna go get some mustard," and he like looks off. He like just leaves Spielberg in the middle of him going through that, and Spielberg like looks up and he's like, Harrison, you left at the best. I'm getting to the best part. Like, come back. And it's just like, oh, they're having fun.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
relaxed. They're having fun. I just really appreciate that. I don't know.
Non-toxic. A non-toxic set. We love it.
Yeah, yeah. Because there are a lot of toxic sets in Hollywood from just stories you hear breaking, and
Right.
I'm sure every production has its moments. But it did seem like overall, like everyone's just mostly kind of having a good time and, getting their job done, of course, but
Yeah.
having a good time.
Yeah.
Another thing I appreciated was Spielberg, like you see a decent amount of him like talking one-on-one with actors. And there's even like a talking head where he says, quote, "I have to be a different director for each actor moment to moment." And I don't know, I feel like one thing that maybe we don't often think about with directors is they really have to be, I guess, like socially,
Adept.
yeah, that's exactly the word. That's the word I popped in my head, and I was like, "Is adept the right word?" And so, thank you confirmed that. But yeah,
And
they
people
have
we've
to like,
heard have talked about it as like mothering.
yeah. I mean, yeah, you have to know. Okay, I want to get this out of this actor. But if I do it the same way, like if I do it with Karen Allen the same way that I do it with Harrison Ford, like it's not going to get the results I want. So I have to know how to speak to this person to get it's not like you're milking them for what you can get out of them, but it's just being like, I guess like empathetically aware of how like they receive criticism or receive encouragement best,
Yeah.
or receive like how how you need to give them a note so that they can understand it well and employ it well and not be like mad at you. And
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
it's like it's a very like, I think, unique job in that sense of like really like having to be able to communicate to so many different people in so many different ways. Because not only do you have to do that for your actors, I mean, you have to do that for your crew members.
Exactly.
Um, it's a lot, uh, and that's why like I think a lot of times people don't like when Spielberg was getting his start, like in TV. None of the older like actors and stuff wanted to work with him, not because like they were like, this kid sucks. It was because he was a kid, and like, they're like, I don't want to work with this kid. He's not going to know how to like work with people well. And so, I guess like as you mature as a director, you as you just mature in life, you probably mature as a director in knowing how to communicate better with people and
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, it's probably a note that just all of us can take from directors. Let's be more like directors and learn how to like communicate well and be emotionally intelligent with people.
The good directors. Let's be like the good directors.
Good directors. Yes.
The kind directors.
Let's not be Stanley Kubrick. Let's be more like Spielberg. But that's another good point. Production design. What was y'all's? I'll ask you this: what was your favorite set in the movie? That's a fun thing to think about.
That's a good
There's
question.
a lot of good ones.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that jumps out to me is that opening scene, and
Yeah.
I don't know if it's necessarily the set itself, but it's how it's utilized and the way what I think Spielberg is good at, and any really good director does this, setting up an understanding of the geography of what we're walking into. So why I like that set is you understand what they're walking into, so the obstacles seem clearer when they're running away from it when they're exiting as well. You understand what's at
Yeah.
stake because of all the things that they had to do to get in. So
Yeah.
even just running away from the boulder, you may not remember that they have to jump over a large cavern, a large, hole in the ground. But when they do, you're like, oh, that's right. They had to
Yeah.
navigate that to get in. So I think that's a really well utilized set, which becomes a
Yeah.
set piece. Yeah.
I would probably say Cairo, because it does get very complicated with the winding streets and trying to find Marion at the part when she gets put in the basket.
Yeah.
But I would say that it was definitely one of those things where you feel immersed in it. So they did
Hmm.
a really great job at, making it look like 1930s Cairo. As we know, they took down all those TV antennas, and then
Yeah.
it was just, I mean, it's a lot of complexity in terms of the logistics behind the camera, so I can appreciate
Hmm.
that a lot.
Yeah. And like mapping all that out, because that is I mean, it's like a alleyways chase kind of
Yeah.
thing going on.
Yeah.
I think I talked about in maybe the overview episode in this series. I had watched a studio binder video. I don't know if y'all ever
Hmm.
watch their stuff on
Yeah.
YouTube.
They're great.
They have some just great stuff.
Yeah.
They're awesome.
But there was a video this guy had made where he talked about a kind of, I don't know if he it seemed like he kind of like made up this term for something that he noticed that Spielberg does, and he used that sequence as the like main example of it, and he called it, instead of point of view, it's point of thought. And so it's something to where it's not about like necessarily having the point of view of the character, but
Hmm.
having like being able to put yourself in their mind. And so he uses that. He talks about how like, Indy's running around in these alleys, and then you're cross-cutting that with like the baddies like carrying Marion around in the
Hmm.
basket, and Indy's trying to find her. And there's this sequence where it cuts to it's like it cuts to Indy's face, and you hear, well, it's like Marion being carried across like an alleyway, like you see them cross in front of an alleyway, and
Yeah.
it cuts to Indy's face, and he runs up, and you hear a sound, and it's coming from one way, and he looks kind of off to the side to kind of like, oh, the sound's coming from this way. And so if he were just like looking forward, you'd be like, oh, he just saw her cross in front of him. But it's like, no, he's turned around. And so
Hmm.
it's kind of like this, he's putting you
Disorienting.
not in his point of view, but in his like mind, like, oh, the sound is coming from this way. I'm running this way. Maybe I need to cut back the
Yeah.
other way.
Yeah. That's
And
interesting.
so, yeah. So you're not like seeing her run in front of him. You're seeing her somewhere else. And he realizes, oh, she's not this way
Yeah.
in that moment. And
Yeah.
I just thought that was a really cool
Yeah, that is.
way of thinking about it, a point of thought instead of point of view. Um, but yeah, that's a really good sequence. And that one is like too, Spielberg at one point in the documentary is talking about how he wants to use this like small town for Cairo because of the geography. Having like less space to work with kind of
Mm-hmm.
allows the audience to have a better sense of the geography, which allows you to build the momentum of the action better if people can kind of keep up with where you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you have that little like town square that's kind of used a couple of different times. And it's like where they end up pulling the truck into and pulling it into that building and
Hmm.
covering it up.
Everyone's being a vendor after
Yeah,
that
yeah.
moment. Yeah.
Hmm. And they really kind of just like dressed that little area up with like some small little sets and vendors and stuff, which is always fun to see. They also like made miniatures of a lot of those locations. Like they would go scout these locations, and then they would make miniatures of them so that, while they're shooting here, they can Spielberg and his team or whatever can like check out the miniatures, which were like to scale and everything,
That's cool.
and like be working on, be working ahead of time on kind of some composition or like how they were going to shoot, like where they were going to put the camera, that sort of thing, so that by the time they get there, they kind of have a lot of that stuff worked out from working with the miniature.
Yeah.
So
That's
that little
awesome.
town square was a miniature they showed on the making of doc, and it's like it looks just like it. It's really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would. It's hard not to say the opening set piece, just
So
because.
classic.
Yeah. A fun fact about that, it's actually, the idea was inspired by a 1954 Uncle Scrooge comic book. So old Scrooge
Really?
Duck. Yeah,
Wow.
there's something with like this rolling boulder or something in this Uncle Scrooge comic book.
Wow. It's funny.
And of course Spielberg, I'm sure, read it as a kid and like had this idea. And he's actually like got so excited by it that he extended that sequence by a decent, like more than was in the script. And like extended a ramp that was like, I think he made it 50 feet longer. And, I think the ball was like 500-pound ball. It wasn't just like, oh, it's going to hit me and bounce off of me.
Yeah.
It was a fiberglass ball.
Oof.
So yeah,
So look out, Harrison.
watch out.
Or stunt double.
Yeah.
Stunt double.
I think the snake, the arc site with the snakes is a really good one.
Yeah.
They actually, like, at one point Spielberg is like yelling at his production team. He's like, "We don't have enough snakes. We need to get 5,000 more snakes than we have right now." It's like, whoa, 5,000.
Oh.
And I think there was like a day where they shut down production because I want to say it was Vivian Kubrick, who was Stanley Kubrick's daughter, was like really like lambasting them about like animal safety and stuff. And so they had like some animal safety people come in and make sure everything was like up to par, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you watch the documentary, they're just like, it's chaos in there. There's just like snakes everywhere, and like not just like the crew members, but like you got Harrison Ford kind of like tossing around snakes and stuff.
Yeah. We saw some kind of YouTube video that
it might be the same behind.
It might be the same behind the scenes we're talking about, but it was just smaller clips from YouTube, where they started to talk about how some of the snakes were just escaping, into Hollywood, just leaving the set and going into people's, backyards and whatnot.
Maybe so, yeah.
And that's why the kept diminishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're not even all snakes. I think there's like some different kinds of lizards and stuff like that in there too. Yeah, that's I wrote down this quote from Ford where they're like having to like move these snakes around, and he kind of looks up and he's like, let's maybe reconsider this whole thing. It's like, maybe I'm tired of working with the snakes,
Deeply reconsider.
Oh man. Yeah. Another like fun fact that I thought was really funny. Apparently the sound that the stone makes when they're taking it off, like that, the big stone that's like covering up the ark when they recover the ark, and it makes a sound, the stone against stone.
Yeah.
Apparently that was like one of the sound guys' toilet cover that they recorded.
Again, movie magic.
Yes, 100%.
Movie magic. Because it sounds perfect.
Yeah.
We met someone who did the sound design for Titanic at a workshop once, and he said that the sound of Rose's hair rising from the frozen door near the end of the film when they're in the water, spoiler alert, is the sound of crunching lettuce, and he showed us exactly how he did it. So
yeah, it's crazy what they do. The Star Wars has some really fun like sound stuff too, that's fun to look up on YouTube or whatever. There are some Star Wars references in the movie, which is always fun. The plane in the opening is registered to OB3PO, which is obviously, you know, reference to Obi-Wan and
Cute.
C3PO. And also in the Ark recovery site, in the hieroglyphics on the background, you can see C3PO and R2D2 like in the hieroglyphics.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, you'll have to look up an image of it.
Mm.
But that's always fun. You know, there's a lot of fun production stuff. Obviously, they made like plaster molds with wax for the face melting sequence, which is fun to see. It's fun to it's like to watch people making those plaster molds of people's faces. I'm like, I would never want a plaster mold of my face made because it looks just like
torture. It looks like torture.
It does look torturous.
Perhaps that's something AI would be able to help with in the future.
Yeah,
in
maybe
a good
so.
way, in a positive way.
We'll see.
Maybe so. I mean, you have like deep fake technology and stuff like that. That, you know, maybe you can get a deep fake face melt going.
And then 3D print it.
Yeah, I would sign off on that before I would sign off on getting a plaster mold of my face made.
Having to put the straws up your nose and all of that.
Like,
yeah, definitely torture.
It looks awful. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff. Harrison Ford does a lot of his stunts, which is always fun. He did do some of the like dragging behind the truck. He doesn't do the whole like crawling under it. There's like a stuntman that does that. It was fun to like see like him being interviewed kind of in the making of. And they even like had to like dig a trench for the truck to like follow because they're to give him a little bit more clearance.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah. But yeah, that was intense to watch. Like it's intense to watch in the movie, but it was just as intense watching like them like filming it in the documentary. It's a really cool sequence, which maybe we'll talk more about. But yeah. He definitely like bruised his ribs when he was being dragged behind the truck, Harrison Ford. And then in the plane sequence, apparently one of the wheels of the plane like rolled over his leg at one point and tore his ligament in his knee. Painful. Oh man. I'm just like, I just can't imagine doing some of the stuff he did in that movie. Because I think he was like 38 when they were filming this. Right. Like he wasn't a young pup. Like he was.
It's just a whole nother level of suffering for your art, I guess.
That's true.
Yeah. Commitment to the role.
To the craft.
You know, we've talked about the score, iconic. And I really feel like at this point, like John Williams scores start to become synonymous with like Spielberg movies. Like I want to say, so he did Sugarland Express, he did Jaws, he did Close Encounters. I don't know if he did 1941.
I'd have to look it up.
And then Raiders. So like at least 4 of Spielberg's first 5 movies, John Williams does the score. I'll have to look up if he did 41. I mean, I will when I record that episode, but yeah.
He did a little YouTube retrospective recently, which is really interesting to watch because he reflects on his own creative process. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get to watch. There's like a bunch of like in the Blu-rays that I have, there's like a bunch of like making of stuff that's kind of like behind the scenes, but it's like for all 4 movies, all of the first 4 movies. So it's like the music of Indiana Jones, but it's like it kind of encompasses all 4.
Very
so I didn't
cool.
get around to watching a lot of that stuff, but there is one that's focused on the music. So I'll have to watch that at some point to see what old Johnny Williams has to say about the score for this one. One thing I did notice that like I couldn't get out of my head until like I listened to them back to back to see if I was crazy or not, was so there's like the theme for Marion, where anytime there's something like semi-romantic going on between Indy and Marion, there's like a theme that plays, and I'm hearing it and I'm like, this
Familiar
sounds like,
sounding. Yeah.
it sounds like Princess Leia and Han.
Yes.
And so like I went back and like and listened to them back to back, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not crazy. They're not like the same, but they're so similar.
Pretty similar, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess romance just has a sound for John Williams.
Yeah.
And it's that.
And I guess like there's a similar dynamic going on, like two strong-headed characters that are kind of like love each other but don't like want to say it kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I guess John Williams was like, well, this is the same dynamic. I'll just write something similar for them.
And the guys just weirdly look alike.
Yeah. It's so
Could be
strange. Han Ford. Yeah.
Han Jones.
Han Jones. Han Smith, maybe. Indiana Smith.
It's a whole different vibe.
Yeah. Obviously, there's some post-production work for this movie, too. Spielberg even talks about how, like, he talked about this in Close Encounters, too. How, like, it's kind of difficult sometimes to direct actors when you're getting them to, like, act off of something that is going to be added in post.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So that's always interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, you have some like there's a decent amount of post work. Like you obviously have like the apparitions that pop out of the Ark that are like basically like clay animated things that they film and add in post. And then a ton of this movie was ADR'd, which I'm sure y'all know what that is, but if the listener doesn't know, I can't remember off the top of my head what the acronym stands for. A bunch of
people just say automated dialogue replacement now, even though it's not automated. There's another ADR acronym, but I think people say automated dialogue replacement.
Yeah, but that's basically what it is. It's basically like they go back into the studio and record like the dialogue and stuff like that in post to get clearer, I guess like
quality.
Sound. Yeah, clearer quality. And like 80% of this was done that way, which isn't true for a lot of Spielberg stuff. Like but yeah, for this one, I guess it makes sense. There's a lot of like, I've always wondered too, like, is a lot of ADR done because there's so much extra sounds going on while you're making the movie? Like, you know, you watch a making of documentary and, you know, Spielberg's just like yelling out stuff for people to do. And like, there's dialogue happening, but then like Spielberg would be like, everybody go. And you're like, how do you edit necessarily out Spielberg yelling?
Yeah. Extras,
and really, I guess,
extras.
There's a ghost right behind you.
Yeah. Hit your mark. Like, you know, there's all that kind of stuff. And I guess like, yeah, you would have to really go back in and re-record a lot of that. But
I think it could be that. And we had to do just a small percentage of ADR for hours. And some of that was because there was a phone call and the character, you know, the actor wasn't there that day. And so different scenarios.
For sure.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show.
But yeah, they actually did, you know, going a little bit backwards because I just talked about post-pro work, but going a little bit backwards, they did complete it in 73 days.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That
And they
is
didn't have
crazy.
additional cost. Yay, Spielberg, you did
Spielberg, yeah.
it. But yeah, so the movie gets done. It gets released in June of 1981. And this is crazy. Raiders of the Lost Ark was in theaters for like 13 months straight.
My goodness.
It just stayed in theaters.
Wow.
It opened at number 1 in the box office and then stayed in the top 5 for a few weeks, moving up and down. And then in week 6, it had like a resurgence for some reason, and it moved back up to number 1 and then stayed number 1 for like 9 weeks straight.
Impressive.
Which is just crazy. But
Yeah.
but I mean, I guess if you think about it, like this really is kind of the beginning of like people having cable. In the early 80s, it wasn't like fully widespread yet. It was just kind of burgeoning. And so if you're like, I want to see this movie, like I want to watch this movie again, you kind of just have to go to theaters again. And I guess there's not like necessarily a ton of movies playing on TV all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like by necessity, I've got to go to the theater again. If I'm going to the theater again, I guess I'm going to see Indiana Jones.
Why not?
But yeah, it's just crazy. And then it stayed in the top 10 for like 40 weeks straight, which is wild.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. It grossed like, I think 50 million in the first month. And ended up with a worldwide box office of over 350 million. I saw some different numbers, but they were all like in the 350s. So that's like the gross like worldwide that it ended up with eventually.
Yeah.
Because it had like some re-releases over the next like couple of years. But yeah, it did obviously very well with the general public. Critically, mixed reviews critically. You have guys like Vincent Canby saying things like one of the most deliriously funny, ingenious, and stylish American adventure movies ever made. And then you have people like Dave Kerr, who didn't like the character much and didn't like the pace of the film.
Oh wow.
And Paul, the infamous Pauline Kael, who up to this point, like really was kind of like, I hope Spielberg does something. There's something there, and then kind of saw this as a regression. I think in her piece, she did talk about how the first 30 minutes of this movie were like perfect, which I kind of agree with. Like the first 30 to 45 minutes of this movie is just like just perfect, like no flaws.
Yeah.
Everything is just like so precise and just perfect. But yeah, she was kind of one of those critics that wasn't a fan of like the beginning of like the blockbuster era, and like high merchandising of movies. And that sort of thing. She just saw it as like a kind of watering down of the art, which like it's kind of like, yeah, I get it, but at the same time, it's like a really well made movie. Like,
Yeah.
it
Maybe
can be
the
both.
watered down a certain kind of art, but
Yeah.
it can still be art in and of itself of a different genre.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, mixed critically. But the Oscars did give it its due. It had 9 nominations. Nominated but didn't win for Best Picture and Best Director. Best Cinematography and Best Score also didn't win, but nominated. It lost to I want to say, I'm blanking now. Chariots of Fire is the score that it lost to, and so it's kind of like, okay, that's a good score too.
I have to add it to the list. I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
And that's true.
yeah, I haven't either, but I do know the score, so that says something, right?
Yeah, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, but it did win. It had 5 wins for art direction, set decoration, 1 for sound, for editing, for visual effects, and some sort of like special award for sound effects editing, which I don't know if that was like special for that year. That's not like a category anymore. So
Oh,
It was just for the toilet seat, I guess.
I guess so. Like that was like, well done. You win a little tiny gold man for recording your toilet and putting it in a movie. But yeah, obviously like Paramount's like, okay, we're all in. They sign on for the 5-film deal, which eventually we got 5 films.
yeah.
So have y'all seen the newest one yet? I know last time
Yeah, we
we
watched
talked
it
about it, y'all hadn't.
on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was really good. I liked it. I thought it was good.
that's some good things.
But yeah, had a TV show, video games, the whole shebang. It actually like was for a long time like the most owned movie.
Oh, wow.
Paramount, VHS was like getting big at this time. Paramount put out like 500,000 copies released in 1983, and they sold them at $40 each, which sounds crazy to us now, but at the time, VHS tapes were like upwards of $100 each.
Oof, yikes.
And so $40 was actually like a
Steal.
really cheap price.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, and then eventually in 1999, it was admitted to the U.S. Library of Congress's National Film Registry.
That's really cool.
So now it is officially an important movie in American history. Yeah, you
Indiana
can't argue
deserves
with
that.
it.
He deserves
Yeah,
that.
you can't argue with it now.
Yeah.
Sorry, Pauline Kael and Dave Kerr. Like it's in the National Film Registry.
Uh,
It's important. But yeah, now really just an incredible movie. Let's talk a little bit. I know we're gonna have to cut off our discussion here soon, but let's talk a little bit just about some key things with this. What I'll let y'all kind of share a couple of your takeaways from the movie. What is maybe something done in the filmmaking that y'all just really stands out to y'all, whether it be camera work or composition, or what's something that y'all are just like, this is incredible. I want to see more of this in movies. I want to do this in a movie myself.
Honestly, there's so much, but I am really drawn to composition and scenes that are composed in a way that tells a story in the shot itself or is just like really
Yeah.
striking. And I feel like Spielberg is really good at doing that, especially when he's playing with lighting. So it's kind of small, but there's just the scene where they're digging in Cairo, I want to say, and the
Mhm.
sun's up in the sky and like the sky is orange and you can still see the outline of the workers, but that's a cool scene. And
Yeah.
just other things throughout the film that are similar to that. I aspire to be able to do that. It's kind
Yeah.
of photography and filmmaking holding hands. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's just a
Yeah, I
small
love his
example.
silhouettes.
hmm
He like it's like a recurring motif of like using silhouettes in
Yeah.
his movies.
Yeah.
And that one really feels like kind of a Spielberg is like at one point when he saw Lawrence of Arabia when it came out, he like I think he walked out of the theater and was like, well, I'll never be a director. Like nothing can top that.
Yeah.
So that particular silhouette scene that you were talking about like really feels like an homage to Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, I can see that.
A silhouette in the desert with the sunset, for sure.
What about you?
For me, I would say a lot of the authenticity shines through, and I know that sounds strange to say for a genre film like this, but it sort of probably stems from what you were talking about earlier with the production behind the scenes, where Spielberg was sort of saying, not everything can be perfect. I really like
Yeah.
those moments where you can see a lot of the realness. One of the funniest scenes to me is when the Capuchin meets Marion, sort of jumps on
Yeah.
her shoulder, and then its paws just sort of like in her mouth almost, and it kind of just like swipes her face, and she's like, yeah, nice to meet this this little
Yeah.
thing. Things like that, they really get me, and I like seeing those little things.
Yeah, I think that is a benefit of not getting to do like telling yourself I can't do extra takes because you
Yeah.
get like very like real feeling stuff like that. That seems like an example of like, oh, they just didn't do more takes. They just ran with it. But it feels like it's like very character building too,
Yes, that's
which I
true.
appreciate. One of my favorites is actually the the like plane fight sequence. Um,
Oh yeah, when it starts
Yeah, and it's
spinning.
because like it's something that I had written down some like new Spielberg distinctives, and I think it's like some stuff that he does in this movie that like he kind of carries forward in his career. And
Mm.
one of them that you can kind of see a little bit starting in like Jaws and Close Encounters, but especially in this is like multi-layered action and tension. And so like if you think about that plane sequence, you have you have him like trying to get to the pilot, and then he has to climb off and he has to fight like the big giant guy, the big giant bald Nazi.
Yeah.
Um, and then the pilot's like pulling out a gun. The pilot's going to shoot him, and then Marion's knocking out the pilot, and he's still fighting the Nazi.
Yeah.
And then Marion gets stuck in the cockpit, and the plane starts spinning, and
Hmm.
so he's
And then the
having to avoid
gasoline
the
start. Yeah.
yeah, the gasoline starts pouring out. You see like, oh no, everything could explode at any minute. And he's, trying to avoid the propellers and trying to fight the Nazi. He's trying to get Marion out of the cockpit. Like there's just so many layers of like
Yeah.
tension and action going
Yeah.
on at the same time that are like the composition keeps it to where you know exactly where everything is, what's happening, and also like the editing put together in such a way where like you're never like lost with all those things going on. You're never lost, and it's just like building tension and adding more layers to the tension. And it's just like
Yeah.
really like phenomenal. I mean, just
If there was a
to
second thing, I would say it's that. And I think that goes back to
yeah,
the writing as well, where as a writer, you have to really understand goals and obstacles to those goals
yeah,
and layering the obstacles to
oh yeah,
keep the conflict and tension going.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk a minute about character because I want to get y'all's take on this. I'm just a dude and I have uh I'm trying and it's hard to get as a guy more female guests on, but when I do, I want to get the female perspective.
Hmm.
Um what is y'all's perspective on the like Indy Marion relationship? Because uh, just like watching the movie and then like reading some different takes on it. One of the books I'm listening to is by a critic named Molly Haskell, who really was like a harsh critic against Steven Spielberg back in the day,
Mm.
and ended up writing this biography on him. And so it's interesting because she really respects him, but also like is still like can be like critical of him choices a little bit in the book. So it's good to get a different perspective
Yeah.
from that. But she kind of was questioning like the how Marion like moves from this very like tomboy tough girl to like almost an exaggeration of femininity with the white dress and the
Hmm.
screaming and all that. And then on top of that you have like the weird age dynamic with
Yeah.
Indy and Marion that she kind of briefly mentions. And obviously like they took out some of the stuff that was in the original script that was more specific about that,
Oh
probably
yeah.
for the best. um but I don't know, what are y'all's just general thoughts about that?
You had a good point on that.
Let's see if I can remember what I said. Well, for the romance part, my take is I think it works within the film within like what we're seeing, but I do feel
Yeah,
like the backstory is kind of problematic, and I feel like that's
yeah,
something like especially if made today, I think people would really reconsider that age gap. But I
hmm,
think for within the film, what we're seeing on screen. It works. And then for the femininity part and her kind of changing, I think, again, like Indiana Jones, she's a dynamic character. She has both
Yeah.
sides in her, just because when they're in peril, she may act a certain way, but doesn't negate that she was kind of a tough cookie when we first meet her.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. What about you?
Actually, in your overview of Spielberg, Eli, you had mentioned how Indy is the type of character that sort of is like flying by the seat of his pants, and you were
Yeah.
saying he should definitely be dead. I was sort of seeing a lot of that, similarity in Marion.
Mhm.
Maybe there are a few more points to where she may be, sort of screaming and a little more frazzled about it, but I would say in the same way, she is flying by the seat of her pants, and as we know, in a lot of the situations, she's not waiting for Indy to rescue her or for anybody to rescue her. She is, trying to devise her own way to get out,
Yeah.
thinking what's the next step ahead. So it is interesting to see her as a character. I can see a little bit of a digression from the beginning to the end, but
Mhm.
I would say that she comes to Indy's aid as much as other characters do, because he does need somebody to, save him every now and then, and
Yeah.
both of them need other people to save them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think another thing that Haskell had pointed out that I kind of saw too this time around was there is also a bit, her being like more gracious with her kind of take of there's also you can see a bit of Spielberg kind of being in on the joke of the exaggerated femininity that's trying to like make way for the masculine male to prove his masculinity and save her, because of that aspect of Indy where it's almost like this mock heroism, with Indy, because he's the hero but he also like doesn't really ever have a plan and
Yeah.
isn't like on top of anything, like he's very fallible and like
He's just
screws
doing what he
everything up a lot.
can. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
she's doing this. She's in the same boat. She's just doing what she can with the circumstances that she's been put in.
Yeah, for sure. But what yeah, and then too, like with Ford, so this is something that I was thinking about too, like if you had someone like Tom Selleck playing this character, that relationship might be very different just because of the kind of like persona that Selleck would probably bring, just like being aware of his some of his other work. He might bring a more strong and domineering um, presence to that
Yeah.
relationship, whereas Ford just kind of like he's so nonchalant and like about certain things, and it's just kind of like whatever, Marion, and I don't know, it ends up kind of like working. There is chemistry there. I think as corny as the like where does it hurt sequence is, it somehow works. I think it half works just because of the score. It's so
Yeah.
good. But yeah, it's like it's corny in a like, oh shucks, like
Yeah.
look at they're cute kind of way that somehow works.
The
Um
rom-com watcher in me, I guess, sees their relationship and goes like, this is, for a movie, like that's how
mhm,
most romances go. It's
yeah,
it's not perfect, but
for sure.
it's cinematic.
But yeah, Indy is just he's a fun character. Um the there is a bit of like you can question like, well, is he actually like that great of a guy? I think so something that Haskell had written is that he is an adventure loving scholar who is actually quite brutal, a grave robber, imperialist, mercenary, looting third world countries and killing the natives. And like when you read that, it's like, yeah, actually he is all those things. But like when you watch the movie, it's done in such a like cartoonish, almost tongue in cheek way that it makes it like palatable. And it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't want to say it's a good or bad thing, because I think you can make an argument either way. But when I watch it, it's like it's not taking itself that seriously. And so it's hard to like really fault it for something that is so serious, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
but yeah, I appreciated that. And then like on top of that, Indy, like one of the things I noticed is at the ending, Indy like has nothing to do with it. He's just like there tied up. Like he has no like, and he doesn't have anything to do with like stopping the Nazis or anything like that. And so I don't know. It's just funny to me. Like he's just there tied up with Marion, just as helpless. They're just both helpless, just sitting there,
I
and
just
the
have
ending happens.
I have
Yeah.
a perspective on that though, which I think ties with a
Yeah.
lot of things that people say, which is the argument that if Indiana hadn't been a part of the movie, then the same events would have happened, or actually, really, he just helps the bad guys to get what they want. And I think in that case, I would say that might be true, and they may be tied up and they may have nothing really to do in that moment. But that's, the plot, I think emotionally and like in terms of a character arc, which also some people say he doesn't have one. I think he does. And I think it has to do with going from being a skeptic to a believer, and
Yeah.
that his actions in the end, it really more is about him showing the growth that he had, being in the circumstance that he is, where he can't really do anything else, versus it
Yeah.
being a moment of action and heroism, which we already know by that point he could
Mhm.
probably do and could probably have done, um, away with, all of the bad guys and all the terrible situation that they're in by the end. I think it has to do more with the internal journey of the character than the external journey of the character.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, like, it kind of matches with kind of what we've been talking about with him being kind of a fly by the seat of your pants, like, doesn't really have a plan kind of guy. It's like, yeah, he's really just like an archaeologist professor that like is pretty good at having adventures and going and getting objects, but like all throughout the movie, like you never like you don't walk away saying like, man, what a great archaeologist. You're just
Yeah.
like, man, this guy found a lot of stuff and like lost it to bad guys.
Yeah.
And it kind of like it the movie's like kind of in on the joke of this guy is like how I would be if I was dropped into the middle of the jungle and had like maybe a little bit of capability
Yeah.
physically,
Yeah.
and like was a nerd about archaeology, and reading hieroglyphics and
Yeah.
finding cool stuff. But yeah, and I think Harrison Ford, this is why I think Harrison Ford is like so vital, because he does bring that kind of air of the everyman
Yeah.
kind of thing
Yeah, he
that's like
does.
just dropped into the jungle. And that's like a recurring theme of Spielberg's, of like the everyman. It's he wants you to relate to that. And I think you can watch this movie and be like, okay, like some of this I could see, like if I was like maybe a little bit more good with a whip and physically adept in this way and was a nerd about where ancient objects can be found, like, yeah, that would be me. I would screw it all up probably too. Um,
But
but
look cool doing it.
looked cool doing it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. um, and then too, like it kicks off, that ending too kicks off like a series of inexplicable encounters with the transcendent, which I think is really cool. And maybe we'll get more into that as we get further into this series. Because I think Last Crusade is a real big thing. It really like expands.
Mhm.
This one, it just kind of happens, but they don't talk about it. And then they really like, I guess like Indy really faces that and talks through it as a character in once you get to Last Crusade. So we'll probably unpack that more once we get to that movie.
Nice.
But yeah, it definitely starts with this one, which I think is an interesting aspect of. It's really an interesting aspect of Spielberg's career as a whole. Inexplicable encounters with like ordinary people. But yeah, really cool. Did y'all have any final thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark?
I think it's just a really good mixture of things that we love in genre films. I think you mentioned it earlier, but the fact that it isn't just one thing, it has a little bit of mystery, a little bit of suspense, some good fight scenes, a little bit of
Yeah.
romance, you know, it just being
Some
here,
espionage.
a little bit of espionage, being here in South Louisiana, we love a good gumbo. And I feel like that's what this film is.
Yeah. Yeah, the lagniappe,
Yes.
all the lagniappe thrown in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, what I do like to ask my guests, where does this fall like in the Spielberg movies you've seen? Like, I don't expect you to have seen all of his movies because I haven't.
Yeah.
But is this like top tier? Is it like
It
next
is.
tier
I would
down?
say
Or
it's top tier, and then in terms of just the Indiana Jones movies, I would say for me it goes between being first and second.
what is the other one?
I mean, I guess that also really depends, but I would probably say Temple of Doom.
Okay.
That second one, the one with like
That's
the child sacrifice.
Basically, I mean, I like the comedy in that one a lot.
See, I'm not a big fan of Temple of Doom. I'm excited to revisit it for the episode upcoming. But yeah, it's one of my least favorite Spielbergs. So that's fun. It's fun to get differing opinions on that sort of thing. But yeah. Okay. What about you, Chasah? Is this like top
Yeah.
tier for
I'd
you?
say out of a lot of his films, it's really up there because of that mixture, like I talked about.
Yeah.
And I did actually very recently just watch The Color Purple, and I can see some of the even
Yeah.
with a movie like that silhouette kind of
Yeah.
shot usage throughout the film, really strong themes of characters being connected, and so I liked that as well. But yeah, he does pretty like consistently great stuff. So that's a really hard question, but I would say it's in the top tier.
Yeah.
I couldn't give you a number right now.
Yeah. It's for me, it's not my favorite indie movie. Last Crusade is my favorite
With the
Indiana
dad.
Jones movie. Yeah. So that's my favorite one. This one is definitely second. I just think the character development and stuff like that is just more interesting and better in Last Crusade, which I'll get to that later in the series. But yeah, it's yeah, Jaws is probably will always be my favorite Spielberg. I think it's his best one just for me personally. But yeah, most people really like if you did a poll, like probably 9 times out of 10 Raiders would win the poll for the best for the favorite Spielberg movie sort of thing.
For me, it would be below that first Jurassic Park movie, but
yeah, that's fair.
Probably second.
I think I probably like Jurassic Park more than Raiders 2.
Same.
Yeah, there's a nostalgia factor in there a bit, but that's okay.
Yeah,
it's my ranking. I can do it however I want. Well, we're gonna cut off our discussion with Chasah and Charliese. I might go back and add a few more points that I wanted to make, but we are out of time for recording this. So just a reminder, you can find out more about Chasah and Charlise's work at Set West on Instagram. And I will link that in the episode page. But yeah, next week they're going to be joining me again for a short discussion on screenwriting. Going to get some insight for them on what that process looks like, at least for them. So I'm excited to talk with y'all about all that. And then we'll, of course, be jumping into E.T., which is the next movie in the series. So excited to revisit that one too. But that is all we have for this week on Raiders. So yeah, we'll look forward to talking to you guys again next week for the show.
Thank you,
Thank y'all for
Eli.
coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Hello there, listener. Don't you ever want more for your life? Don't you ever dream of surpassing the status of just podcast listener? Well, I've got good news. If you head on over to establishingshotpod.com and click the send a voicemail button on the right side of your screen, you can be featured on the podcast. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's a comment in response to an episode you liked, an opinion of mine you disagreed with, or just a question for me. And if you're too shy to have your voice featured, you can always email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. Don't settle for just being a podcast listener. Reach for the stars and get featured on The Establishing Shot. Back to the show.
I did want to come back on after my discussion with Chasah and Charliese and add a few more points that I wanted to hit. Just kind of around some of my thoughts on what we see for Spielberg in Raiders of the Lost Ark. One of them is that this movie, I feel like it is like the ultimate escapism movie. Just like you hear in interviews, Lucas and Spielberg both talking about how they just wanted to make a movie that they would love watching. And I think Spielberg to this day still says, like, out of all of the movies he's ever made, this one is one that he can just go back to and watch over and over and never get tired of it. And so it really is just a movie that's just enjoyable to watch. There's not really a big moral here. There's not necessarily like a big right and wrong, and we gotta like, there's some deep stuff to dig into here. It's really just like kind of a black and white, good versus bad, cheer for the hero kind of movie. And I wanted to point that out because I feel like sometimes that can be looked down on from an artistic perspective. And I don't know, I feel like if a movie is well made, like if you have a movie that's like that isn't well made, then yeah, sure, you can, have your critiques of it. But yeah, I don't know, a movie that's well made, that's not trying to go deep into any themes, and it's just like, yeah, these are the good and bad characters. Let's cheer for the hero and watch some really fun stuff. Man, that's great art if it's made well. That's fun. It's a lot of things Spielberg's doing here is difficult stuff to pull off, and so yeah, I just wanted to touch on that point. You hear sometimes the theme park analogy used for this movie. It's just a theme park. It's just a bunch of rides. And it's used like in a bad way, but I don't know about you. I kind of enjoy going on rides in theme parks. And if I can do that in a movie theater, then I don't really see anything wrong with that. Yeah, I don't know. You have something happening every 10 or 15 minutes. It's another big hill on a roller coaster. And I just think that's fine. A movie doesn't have to be saying something deep and special about humanity. It can just be fun and be something that you can escape into. Now, like, do I think every movie should be that way? No, like you need good movies made that are deep, that deal with humanity and deal with problems and deal with grief and deal with all these things. You need good movies made for all those things. And so yeah, every movie shouldn't just be a purely escapist movie, But when a good one is made, like, yeah, I'm going to enjoy it. And, you should too. So yeah, I appreciate that movie. The action still holds up today. The, um, the, you think about some of the action in this movie is very like slowly built up, and it takes a long time for it to reach its climax. And it kind of, when you juxtapose that against some of more recent action or like kind of big superhero Marvel maybe movies, you don't necessarily get that. It's just like go, 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 big thing, big thing, big thing. So I think it's probably good for people to go back and watch stuff like this that takes its time with the action and really like builds the tension well. Another thing I do appreciate too is, this Spielberg and Lucas made this as a callback to those 30s and 40s serials. And they kind of build a mythology of the past, but you as the audience member, you don't have to have that foundation to enjoy it. You don't have to have familiarity with those sources to really understand it and to be on board with it. It's kind of like just universal storytelling is probably why you have a good guy, you have a bad guy. Good guy wants this thing, bad guy wants this thing. Let's see who gets it first. Another thing I really appreciate about Spielberg. So these are a few things I mentioned already in discussion with Chasah and Charliese, the multi-layered action and tension that he builds. There's some other like really cool things that I really noticed in this movie in particular that I think Spielberg will carry with him. One of them is little details. There are so many little details that either build the world or build tension in some way or build character in some way. They're just little details. I wrote down a list. So in the opening sequence, you have the corpse skeleton head turning over towards Indiana Jones. And it's just this little detail. It's just this little movement that happens that adds so much to both like the horror and tension of the situation, to Indy's reaction when it does turn. It's a little detail. You have the hilarious "I love you" written on the eyelids, which was just this kind of like on a whim decision that they made in the production of this movie. That is just this little detail. It's just this little side thing that happens that's really funny, like, and goes by so fast. You have a lot of other like stuff that happens in action where there's a couple of things with the swastikas that are kind of like small details, but also are like saying, yeah, Nazis are bad. You have the blood being splattered on the tail of the plane, which has a swastika on it when the big Nazi bald guy gets chopped up by the propeller. Just a little detail. And you also have the swastika on the box where the ark is being held, that gets burned up from the holiness of the ark being inside the box, I guess. Another blood splatter is when Indy gets shot. You see blood splatter on the windshield, and from there on out in the car chase, that blood is there. It's just a little detail that adds to the narrative and gives you that sense of where you are. Like, when you are looking through the windshield, you're like, oh yeah, he was shot. You can see the blood right there on the windshield. And I also appreciated kind of another cut at the Germans is that Indy's, on the front of the truck, and it's a Mercedes Benz, and he, which is a German company, and he rips the Mercedes Benz logo off trying to pull himself up. Yeah, just so many things. Another thing that could kind of fall into this category of little details is the efficiency of everything used. There's not a single, I guess, thing in this film that's wasted. so the way I think about this is you have these comedic callbacks to things earlier in the movie that are used to build a character and also like give you an awareness of kind of what's happening in a kind of comedic way later in the movie. So a few examples of this. One is Marion, when she's having the drinking contest, when you're introduced to her, it builds her character. It's introducing you to her as the kind of person she is, the tavern that she runs, what it's like. It's doing so much, but it's not just for that. You also get the later sequence with Belloc where you're aware of that because of that sequence earlier, and you're aware that she's trying to get him drunk so that she could escape. And it's kind of a funny callback too at the same time to that earlier scene. Just like being so efficient with stuff like that. Another couple of examples, you have the dates, you have the interaction with Indy and Marion where he's like, they're dates, you eat them. And then he's walking around, of course, later with holding the date, and something's up with the date, that he shouldn't eat it. So that's kind of another one. And then you have, of course, probably the most recognizable one is the snakes. You open with the opening sequence ends with, Indy yelling, "I hate him," about the snake that's in the cockpit of the plane with him. And then, of course, later when they open the hatch to the site where the Ark is, it's filled with snakes. And what does Indy say? He says, well, why did it have to be snakes? You already are aware that this is going to be torture for him as soon as you see those wriggling reptiles down there below. Just nothing wasted in the film. All these little details that are used efficiently and more than once, as those examples I gave. The other thing is it kind of goes along with those other two things of the little details, the multi-layered action. You also have Spielberg really exploiting every ounce of action from a sequence. Best example is the car chase scene, which arguably should have been drafted in our car chase draft that I did with guest Dave Lester. Going back, I'm like, man, one of us should have taken this, because rewatching it, it's an incredible car chase scene. But yeah, he exploits everything. Every square inch of that truck is used at some point. The back, the inside of the back, the top, someone's on top of it. They're crawling along the sides. People are hanging off the front. Indy goes under it and pulls himself back up both sides. People are going in both sides of the cab, through the windows, out of the doors. Every square inch of that truck is used for action. And it's done to the effect of making the audience as exhausted as the characters are in that sequence. And it's just masterwork of action and geography and building tension and, getting your audience to feel the same as the characters. Just so well done. But yeah, I just, really wanted to kind of touch on those few things because we are going to be seeing that, as we keep going through this series, those little details, that multi-layered action and tension building, the using every square inch of something for an action sequence. And then too, another little thing is kind of genre blending, which we talked about, me and Chasah and Charliese a little bit, of all the different genre kind of stuff, influences that you can see in this, is something that he'll do in future films here and there. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure to touch on those things. That is really kind of all I have for for you for this week for Spielberg. Raiders of the Lost Ark, great movie, iconic. Not my favorite Indiana Jones movie, but still great. Hard to fault it. Yeah, I am looking forward to next week, talking with Chasah and Charliese about screenwriting. They've done some work in screenwriting and directing, so I'm excited to get some insight from them next week. Remember to go rate and review the show if you haven't ever done that before. It only takes a minute of your time, helps a ton. And if you have any feedback on the episode, I'd love to hear that too. You can email us at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. You can even leave a voicemail on the website. If you go to establishingshotpod.com, click leave a voicemail, and I'd love to hear from you. Feedback on the show, thoughts about this episode or other episodes. Maybe you have an insight to a movie that you want to share that we've covered. I'd love to hear that and feature that on a future episode. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you if you have a chance to do that. Otherwise, that is all we have for this week. I have been Eli Price, and for Chasah and Charliese West, you've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.